Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims? Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace with ilk and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Hi, I'm Rob Penzak.
And I'm Kayla Terzak.
Welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. Today, we're going to have another great show. We're going to be joined by Steve Shives in a little bit to talk about the 5 stupid things about just about everything you can imagine. First, we're going to go through some of our introductory material. Why don't we start with one of our news stories. It's about presidential hopeful Mike Huckabee and his feelings on abortion rights, that he thinks that it's, if he becomes president, he would be perfectly justified in bringing in the federal troops and the FBI to help stop those illegal abortions. Does that seem a reasonable measure to take?
Absolutely. Obama, well, I guess Obama hasn't done that yet, but, you know.
He's plotted
apparently he's, overstepped his boundaries, and I guess that means Huckabee can do it when he's
right.
president.
And so he points out that although the Supreme Court ruled against bans on abortion, past presidents have defied Supreme Court rulings. And so this should be concerning. This is something that you would think the media would pick up when you have a presidential contender saying, I'm perfectly ready to ignore one of the 3 branches of government. That should be concerning for all of us.
It's a red flag.
It is. And another similar red flag, so the Alabama Court Chief Justice, he's now Supreme Court Justice for the state of Alabama, Roy Moore. He's the one that had gotten kicked out of office about 12 years ago because he wanted to have the 10 Commandments sitting there in the court. They decided that was unconstitutional and he wasn't going to change it. So then he naturally got promoted to Supreme Court Justice. And now on same-sex marriage, he's advocating that people that have a religious objection against this simply don't perform in marriages. And again, he's coming under some fire that doesn't seem like the appropriate thing for a Supreme Court justice to be recommending.
I wonder how many people are going to actually keep their jobs doing that. I mean, as your civil servant, you're working for the government. You don't have, if the government mandates something, you don't have a right to say, no, I'm not going to obey the government and keep your job. So.
Right, nobody's trying to compel Roy Moore to go out and marry a man, but for him to be just telling other people not to follow the laws is a typical problem that we're seeing from a lot of the right-wing radicals. So, moving on, why don't we go to the joke of the day, I suppose, and this is again in the same vein that the end of the Republican debate was ended with a question by Megyn Kelly, who brought us White Santa and White Jesus. This was submitted by a Fox faithful viewer, of course, kind of asking if any of the candidates have received word from God as to what their priorities should be when they took office.
Apparently they had a long conversation about that.
Yeah, and it would seem, we're in the 21st century, industrialized nation, science runs so many things, critical thinking is hopefully going to spread a little bit. The idea that this is a legitimate question and it's not a parody, this isn't something in the Onion, this is, Fox News bringing, here's an important question, we need to know if God is talking.
I mean, if they wanted to know if God was talking, or if they had a word, they could have just shut up and listened, had a moment of silence where they just listened, try to hear God.
We've tried that here. We invited God. I remember David Tamara had a show. Well, then God didn't show up.
Sometimes.
Well, that's true. I remember there was one where Paul helped out with this.
So, I've heard my Lord speak. I've heard my Lord speak.
Has he helped you a lot?
Yeah, he gets me through a lot of hard times.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm suffering. I've not had a chat with the Lord yet. I'm still waiting. In terms of our secular person of the week, we do want to take advantage of one of the Supreme Court rulings, and since corporations are people, we want to nominate the Secular Coalition for America, nonprofit, for their Put Kids First initiative. This is to help combat some of the anti-vaccination nuttery going on out there, where they're saying we need to get rid of some of these religious exclusions, where people can just say I have a religious objection, they don't vaccinate their kids. It happens in a big enough percentage to compromise herd immunity, and now population is suddenly at risk. So that'll be interesting to see where that goes. There's some rules that are being passed that don't totally get rid of religious exemptions, but they make it a little more difficult, or you have to kind of cite very specific religious objections. Hopefully we'll get to the point where so what if your Bible says something? What does that have to do with our secular society and the rules that, you and I have to deal with the fact that other people don't get vaccinated?
Yeah, it's a really hard one because it really does affect other people. And a lot of people, walking around saying, well, I mean, measles isn't a big deal anymore. They're walking around under a whole bunch of umbrellas not getting wet from the rain. But when there's not enough umbrellas, i.e. vaccines, to cover certain number of people, you not having an umbrella does matter.
Right.
So you're going to get wet if nobody has I don't know if you understand
Yeah. Again,
So
some people have legitimate medical reasons that they can't take a live attenuated vaccine because their immune system is faulty and they could actually get the serious disease. So there's some people that really can't take it, and their only hope is that enough people are sensible, and we do have broad enough herd immunity that they can go on and live healthy lives.
Yeah.
And so these anti-vaxxers, and it's not scientists out there saying, hey, we're not sure about vaccines. We have actors with no scientific background that get a huge megaphone, and we don't have enough critical thinkers in society. We don't have herd immunity to silly thoughts. And so it just takes off. And we've seen around some mega churches that you suddenly have measles outbreaks, or they have a whooping cough had come back. So they're doing a lot of real damage. And when people are looking for harm of religion or just poor thinking, there's a good example.
And it's just scary. And just to elaborate on the umbrella example, just in case none of the viewers have heard of the umbrella example, when it comes to herd immunity, if you're walking down the street and a whole bunch of people are walking down the street at once with umbrellas, then if you don't have an umbrella, you're still not going to get wet because there's enough umbrellas to cover you. But if, for instance, enough people don't have umbrellas, you not having an umbrella is gonna matter. So I just wanted to clarify that.
And I can't help but
that's one of the greatest analogies that I
I want to take the libertarian pot shot there and say, now if it's a libertarian holding your umbrella, it's going to be like, get your own umbrella, man. Plan ahead. No, that's just pot shot. All right. A few announcements. The upcoming shows, we have Rick Wingrove and Larry Mendoza will be here next week with Robert Beatty. He's a former IRS lawyer. They're going to be talking about Kent Hovind, some of his troubles and separation of church and state issues. After that, I believe you're going to be back with Grace Tellini talking to Karen Garst, the faithless feminist. And then
that'll be fun.
the last week of the month is David Tamayo and Stephanie Guttormson, who's joining the show. We're all excited about that.
Exactly.
They're going to be speaking with David Smalley of Dogma Debates about the kind of new wave of publishing in the atheist publishing.
Cool.
So that's what we have on tap. I think, why don't we go just to a short break at this point, and then we're going to come back and have a nice long show with Steve Shives about a lot of stupid things in our world.
Good. Homemade noodles. Marty, stop it. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. It reminds me, I've been thinking maybe we should try a new form of birth control. I heard about this one, it's called the IUD, intrauterine device. Or we could try the patch on your arm. Actually, I think that one goes in your butt.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
What do you think then? Arm or the butt?
There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
You want to know something really liberating about critical thinking? It allows you to drop all your pretenses. As a critical thinker, there's a recognition that there are no more powerful words in the English language than "I don't know." It's pretty awesome, actually. Admitting you don't know shouldn't be viewed as an admission of weakness or insecurity. It's the only place where real learning and growth begin. Did you ever wonder what it is about being a child that makes life so much fun? What is it that kids have that we lose as we grow up? It's their sense of wonder and delight at discovering things. They know they don't know, and they can't wait to find out. They pester everyone with questions because they want to know everything. Unfortunately, as we get older, that sense of wonder pretty much gets beaten out of us. Socially, we're taught by our peers almost as soon as we start making friends that ignorance is not bliss. The name-calling, the ridicule, and being laughed at soon convince us that it's better to just make things up instead of admitting that we don't know. We get into this habit and pretty soon can even convince ourselves that we're experts in areas we know almost nothing about. We walk around wearing this pretense of knowledge like body armor, but really it's as thin as tissue paper because we know anyone, anywhere could find out what a fraud we are at any moment. Do you like living like that? Because I don't. And here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with not knowing. The truth is that saying I don't know is not any indication that you're a moron or lacking in any kind of intelligence. It just means you never learned or can't remember something. We are born not knowing, and it's the quest for knowledge and experience that keeps life fresh and keeps us alive. Some of the most miserable, hateful, and spiteful people I've ever known have been the ones who thought they knew exactly what was going on and didn't have anything more to learn. Don't try to tell them anything, they've got it all figured out. Those aren't the people who are changing the world for the better. They aren't even trying. It's those who want to learn, who want to discover, and want to grow. Those are the people upon whom we all depend to make the next big discoveries and take the next leap forward. They are the scientists, the inventors, the philosophers, and the leaders who can take our species to the next level in our evolution. We all have it in us to learn and grow. It starts with an honest appraisal of what we do know, what we are certain of, and being strong enough to admit that we have some more learning to do. I love critical thinking for teaching me this. I can't wait to learn more.
Welcome back. We are now joined by our guest. He is a rudderless, ethically unencumbered, godless heathen who thinks there are a lot of stupid things about the world, and he's trying to tackle those 5 stupid things at a time. Kayla, you're the one that first brought him to our attention, so maybe, what is he doing here? Who is this guy?
This is Steve Shives. He's a YouTuber who does 2 really great series a lot more series than that, but the series that I personally watch is the 5 Stupid Things, and he also does a series, An Atheist Reads, which is great because he goes through different apologetics books and, kind of tells us why they're kind of stupid. So, yeah.
So, Steve, how long have you been doing this, and how did you first get into activism and YouTube stuff?
Well, I hesitate to call myself an activist because all I do is do YouTube videos. But about 5 years. I've been doing my YouTube channel for about 5 years now. I did a response video to a Christian who used to do YouTube videos named Veritas48, who did a 5 questions for atheists video. Mm-hmm. And I responded to that, and I thought, hey, I really like doing this. So
That was your first video?
Yeah.
Did you do it twice? Did you do 2 of them? Because I know one of them, but I didn't realize that the other one was like the...
I re-uploaded it. Oh, so the re-uploaded version is probably the one that you saw.
Okay, cool.
And now you're trying to actually make a career out of this, right? Like, there's many people in the atheist world, there's not much money in it. How is that going?
I'm making a living at it. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it's a career.
No, but even so what are the logistics? How do you go about that? Because most people, there's just no money.
Yeah, well, you get ad revenue through Google, through YouTube. Mm-hmm. I guess the secret to my success is just being prolific, mm-hmm. just doing a lot of it. I do 6 videos a week, technically. One of them isn't monetized, though, so I don't make anything for mm-hmm. it. But yeah, and then when you have sort of external sources of income like Patreon that a lot of people are taking advantage of. So it's easier now than it was when I started, mm-hmm. and it's easier for me now because I have a bit more of a higher profile. But yeah, it can be very tough. Mm-hmm. I have great sympathy for people who don't make as much at it as I do, who don't want it to be a hobby, who would like it to be a full-time thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We can't all be dark matter 25/25.
Yeah.
So I want to get into something a little bit personal. I know that, like a lot of us here, you and your wife have been struggling, I understand, since this marriage equality. You guys holding it together as a heterosexual couple?
We're holding it together, yeah. Hi, Ashley, by the way.
Yeah, do you have any strategies for people to defend their marriage?
Yeah. Our secret has just been not worrying about it.
Interesting.
Reminding ourselves that nothing has been taken from us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is funny how this is such an enormous issue for the right wing, and it doesn't touch them. Like, how does this truly affect anybody if it's not really affecting you?
No, it means nothing. Nothing has been taken from anybody. Just something has been expanded. It's like when a new group of people get the right to vote. You're just expanding the marriage franchise. You're just saying, okay, now it's open to more people. Nobody was kicked out.
Right. This
and
doesn't
it's
even
better for like groups. I mean, it's proven that like the family dynamic is a positive. Is a positive thing within our society. The way that we have it set up, there's a lot of positives, like more economically stable. It's better for children, and then like I just think it's funny that they're just all like, no, like we don't want marriage because marriage is such a wonderful thing. I don't know.
Exactly. Well, now they're going to that position of, now that the Supreme Court has legalized it across the board, they're saying, well, maybe we don't need to have government marriage at all.
Right.
You know, they're taking their ball and going home. Nobody needs marriage. Forget it.
Yeah. Right, and I think you made a great point about the family values crowd. Here's a couple that loves each other, will provide a stable structure, they adopt kids. What is the downside of this, other than if the Bible gives them some excuse to disenfranchise this group?
Yeah.
And in terms of, with voting, as some people on the religious right have said, our goal is not to have an inclusive system, because the more other people vote, the less we get. So in a sense, when you let more people vote, it does dilute their hold on it. Right. This doesn't even do that. This truly has no impact on anybody who's not interested in getting married to a same-sex partner.
No.
Yeah. Unless you're like teaching kids to be gay in schools and stuff. That's why, like, I've heard people actually say in California they have classes where they teach kids about gay couples, and like literally that's what they're upset about. They're upset because they're having people having gay couples come in and say, hey, like this is our family.
Right.
Like,
so they don't understand what it means to be gay because otherwise they would know you can't teach somebody how to do it.
Yeah. It's funny. The Bible Reloaded. One of my favorite, one of my favorite YouTube channels. They do one episode where literally it's about that particular issue, and what's the guy's name again? The little Chick Chacks. They do the Chick Chacks, and this guy is like this crazy like Chick Chack guy, and he basically didn't understand like homosexual relationships, because one had to be the woman, one had to be the man. They had two people like, this is my wife, and they were both men. It was funny.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, the people who don't understand it and yet they're infuriated by it.
Yeah.
It's always kind of amusing.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the one crowd that will tend to marginalize are the pastors or priests that make a living by telling people what their morality should be, as they continue to lose their stranglehold, as secular ethics start to replace theirs. I guess they are somewhat threatened by this. Why don't we move on to another subject now? And this is, I've seen a bunch of your videos at this point. Most of them have, really nice approval ratings. The one set that don't are the ones that go after the men's rights movement.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that a little bit. First of all, what's your position on that, and what kind of response have you gotten?
Well, my response from people who are fans of the men's rights movement has been very negative, because my opinion of the men's rights movement is about as negative as my opinion can be of anything. I hold them beneath contempt, because I think that they're a hate group. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. And I think that they're even worse because they exploit the concerns of legitimate, men who maybe are having trouble or vulnerable or who have been abused or whatever, and they pretend to care about those issues to give themselves a veil of legitimacy, when in fact I think if you look at the groups that comprise the men's rights movement fairly, they really don't seem to ever do anything about these issues that they claim. So they're dishonest, and they're exploiters of the very people that they claim to be advocating for. I have nothing but disgust for them.
But when it comes to the actual tenets, and you're looking through, one of your videos did talk specifically about like, hey, like a lot of people who agree with the points don't want to identify with men's rights movements because of the culture. Although you agree with a lot of the points that they have written down.
Well, there are two groups that I think we need to draw a line between. There are legitimate activists many of whom are feminists, who work to help vulnerable men, who run shelters, who run helplines, who facilitate maybe if a man is in an abusive relationship, how he can get help, how he can call the police, how he can get out of the house. This is the same thing that are done for women if they're in a domestic violence situation. So there are those people. And they don't want to be associated with the men's rights movement because of the stink on it. And then there's another group of people who basically are functioning as men's rights activists, but they deny that they are men's rights activists. They say all the same things that men's rights activists always say. They make all the same arguments. They parrot all the same talking points, but they'll say, now I'm not a men's rights activist, as though that gives them a little bit more credibility. But when you look at everything they're saying, it's really a meaningless distinction. You know, it's sort of a walks like a duck type situation.
And I think that there is a medium there of like feminists who aren't radical, but in my opinion, I've come across a lot of really radical feminists who everybody rolls their eyes at too. So I think that like there's a lot of comparisons in the way that these two groups of people behave, these radical feminists and these radical men's rights movement
Well, I disagree with that a little bit. I mean, I don't disagree that there are extremist feminists. Clearly, there are, you know, men and women. Well, I mean, I have no problem with the concept of a patriarchy, but no, there are extremists within the feminist movement, and there are problems with the feminist movement that you can find easily. Just ask a feminist. Feminists are very good at pointing out the elements in their own movement that they happen to disagree with. It's not a monolithic movement at all. But when people try to make the comparison and say, well, there's extremists in feminism and there's extremists in the men's rights movement too, my question has always been, where are the non-extremists in the men's rights movement? Where are the reasonable people?
They're not in the movement.
They're not in the movement. And many of the ones who claim to not be in the movement but are of that second type that I just talked about are just as extreme as the ones who claim the title of men's rights activist.
I think the issue is that, well, I mean, I don't think it's an issue necessarily. Feminism has a longer history, and they actually legitimately had really big issues to conquer in the past. Yes. And I personally consider myself more of a libertarian feminist, if that. And a big part of that is I feel like a lot of the changes that we need to make now have to do with women's whether or not women are choosing certain opportunities, because I feel like there's a lot of opportunities that haven't been there in the past. And so I do take issue with a lot of radical feminists. Any feminist who says that my personal decision should be about women, like I'm autonomous, and I think that can be my issue about feminism. And sometimes I feel like it does ignore men's issues. So anyway, we need to have a huge debate about this.
No, and I say one thing.
Let's just make the rest of the show about this.
No, we're not going to get stuck on this show. But one thing I noted about your video is you take pains at the beginning to introduce some nuance and say, here are some specific things that are legitimate. You know, men don't get custody, you know, as easily, and that should be looked into. Men might have to go, and this isn't so true now, but like for military service was an extra thing that they had. You know, violence does happen against men, and it's not like Steve or anybody else is saying, hey, we shouldn't address this. It's just the men's right movement doesn't genuinely seem so interested. It does seem like they seek cover, and so the people that go after you in their rebuttals to yours, and I tried to watch it a couple times, it's so laced with vitriol and nastiness, and it's not just saying, here's some points that he makes, and here are the serious reasons I disagree. I'm not saying they have to be wimpy, they can be firm, but it's just like spewing hate, and I wasn't moved by any, like, you know, that's a great argument. Because he already acknowledged, here are the points that we all should be concerned about, and so I don't think that's what lies at the heart of it. And so I would say that in terms of radical feminists, I've always considered myself a feminist. I agree with, you know, 98% of the important planks that sort of make up the platform. The part that I now have a problem with is there is a group that if you're not willing to mouth the same rhetoric that I do, you're a misogynist. And that's really disturbing and really divisive, because I really do care about women's rights, and what more can I do? So, you know, I think that's a divisive element in the atheist movement right now that's become a problem.
Oh, definitely. The attitude toward women and the attitude toward the anti-woman or the anti-feminist elements within the atheist community is something that I am constantly shaking my head over.
I mean, as a woman though, I don't feel that. Maybe other women have that experience, and it's this widespread thing that I'm not getting, but I have never really experienced that, so...
It's widespread. I don't know if it's widespread in terms of number of people that feel that way. My friend and fellow YouTuber Christy Winters is a social scientist, and she has long suggested that somebody do a really serious survey of professing atheists to try and have some data on, are anti-feminist attitudes really that prevalent in the movement, or is it just a relative few people who are making a big noise? And I would love for somebody to do that. So there's an actual picture we can look at and say, okay, actually most atheists don't feel hostile toward feminism. It's
but almost even raising that issue of, hey, we should look at this and get some real data, there's a whole segment that's going to say, wait a second, we already told you there's one, and that's the problem. Like, we're genuinely interested in addressing this and fixing it, but we'd like to know more about it, and that shouldn't classify us as, you know, misogynists and haters.
Oh, no.
Except for Steve.
Yeah, well, call me whatever you want. But no, there are people who have the experience that you say you had, where you don't really get it. It's not really a big deal.
A lot of really great MRAs too. So,
but I know a lot of women who say, I don't comment on YouTube videos that are published by atheists because I'm afraid of the abuse. I hear that a lot. So it's not as if I can just say, well, it's, you know, just a few people. You know, it clearly is an issue. Now, whether it's an issue because there are a lot of angry anti-feminists, or if it's because there are just a few who are just really angry and have to swarm everything, it's kind of hard to tell. Hopefully it's
a lot of extremism and loud voices are on YouTube too.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's our medium.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, YouTube comments are the lowest form of communication.
Like, for instance, Sargon of Akkad. Like, I like listening to his videos. I think that he's like absolutely hilarious because he thinks the world's going to end and we're going to be a Marxist society because of feminists. But a lot of his points make sense. And when you get him off the cusp, you know, actually having a conversation, he's very, very even. Like, he's a little bit radical, but he's not. He doesn't hate women, and he's not like Teal Deer. But at the same time, I kind of feel like sometimes, you know, we get to see a lot of extremism on, you know.
Oh yeah, it breeds it. I mean, YouTube particularly, but the internet in general, sort of amplifies the extremist voices.
So I'm being flashed one extra piece of data saying that the Pew Research Center says that 91% of custody cases are decided without interference of the court. So you know, that's one aspect. A separate thing I wanted to mention, I think the Southern Poverty Law Center, when talking about some of the men's right movement stuff, when I think 90% of the violence against men is by other men. So in some of the rebuttals against you, it's like, hey, men suffer lots of violence, and nobody disagrees with that, but it's not mostly women attacking men. You know, there is some of that, that's fine. But, all right, so why don't we move on? I think we've gone through that quite a bit.
We got feminist.
All right. The other thing I wanted to make sure we covered in some detail was this Planned Parenthood hoax that you go into in one of your videos. So sort of tell us what that was, what the hoax was, and what's happened since.
There was a video released, I guess, 2 weeks ago, something like that, that turned out to be created by a well-known anti-abortion organization, and it was a hidden camera video of a prominent official from Planned Parenthood who appeared in the originally released version of the video, appeared to be describing how Planned Parenthood, how abortion clinics that were supported by Planned Parenthood or operated by Planned Parenthood would sell organs from aborted fetuses on the black market, was the implication. And people freaked out about this and said, this is illegal, this is monstrous, they're selling organs from, you know, aborted fetuses. And what it turned out to be was she was actually describing a completely legal and legitimate program of organ donation to scientific research, which they are occasionally reimbursed for, like for shipping costs or things like that. It's not selling organs because that's illegal. And of course, Planned Parenthood is not selling organs on the black market.
And one of the really important things to keep in mind is that Acorn was shut down by this exact same type of behavior. So it's not innocuous. Their goal really is to cripple these organizations, and then you saw like Bobby Jindal's all the way on his way to, you know,
even though this Planned Parenthood video was shown to be a hoax almost immediately. I mean, there almost no time passed before people figured out and said, oh, this is deceptive editing. And I think for some reason the group that originally posted it posted the unedited video, so they basically stool pigeoned himself.
Do that?
I have, exactly.
No.
Just from a strategic point of view, it's like, why would you do that?
Strategic. Remember, education is fundamental.
Yeah.
Like, people were concerned too about like whether or not they were going to use techniques to abort the fetuses that might not be the most beneficial for the parent, for the woman, because they wanted to preserve some of the organs. And I heard somebody say that they would leave, they would try to go for like long-term, like older pregnancies because they wanted more bigger organs because that paid more. But all of it was with the women's consent. And they didn't actually do anything that would actually harm the woman in those situations.
And we have to stress again, like they aren't being paid for the organs. If any money changes hands, it's to reimburse them for the cost of shipping the organs to wherever
which is with any situation. I mean, blood donation.
Exactly. And the really crazy part is, as you said, Rob, even though this was exposed as a hoax immediately, there are major Republican Party figures who are pretending as though this is a legitimate concern. They are talking about having congressional hearings. Bobby Jindal is saying, I'm going to pull state funding of Planned Parenthood because of this. It's ridiculous.
But Sam Harris has made a point about this with regard to atheism. There was an atheist that had done, they weren't sure if it was a hate crime, if somebody killed somebody somewhere.
So the Muslim?
And immediately, it may have, it was over a parking spot thing, as it turned out, as opposed to a religious.
Atheism,
but even so, the right wing was just so ready to pounce, as this is an atheist hate crime against religion, confirm what we've all known, that atheists are out to destroy all of us religious people. And it's that, that confirmation bias and just the misrepresentation that a lot of them know full well this is a hoax or this wasn't a religious hate crime. And they're just looking for any excuse to sell their point to the Fox faithful, who aren't the most critically thinking and the listeners of hate
How many
radio.
of these like shootings are being perpetrated by atheists? I mean, we've had
so
shooting
far
after
there's one.
shooting.
But and again, it wasn't about atheism.
And it wasn't atheist motivated, right, exactly.
And if it was, the atheist community would be quick and work quick anyway. This is terrible. This isn't part, we're not in favor of this. This isn't like, hey, you got an abortion doctor, good job. That wasn't our reaction
With
to
the
it.
Charleston shooting, I mean, Fox was so quick to say, "Oh no, this was a religious crime because they did it in a church." I mean, I can imagine if that guy would have been an atheist too. Like, come on.
Well, that goes with the confirmation bias thing. The Dylan Roof, the Charleston shooter, almost exactly word for word wrote a manifesto that said, "I'm doing this because they're black," and Fox News was like, "Maybe it's because they were Christian."
Let's get a black guy to say it.
Well, I'm pretty sure, and it's John Roberts penned that thing that no, this is definitely nothing to do with race. Or post-racial America. On that topic, why don't we shift over? Another thing you talked about in that video was the Confederate flag, and that the KKK has decided that they want to weigh in on this. About if it's heritage or if it's something else that they're defending the flag.
Yeah, the KKK decided to just make it easy for those of us who are anti-Confederate flag, and say, "Oh no, it's totally our symbol." And I'm sure there were probably some people who are who are trying to distance themselves from the Confederate flag, and the KKK going, "Oh no, why'd you have to do that?" But the truth is, I really don't see an argument against that. I don't see how, no matter how you try to massage history, you can't get away from the fact that that flag has always been a symbol of white supremacy. People have tried to make it about other things as well, and maybe sometimes it's even to their credit. They realize that, we can't be waving this flag if it stands for racism. Let's say it's about something else. But you can't deny that historically it has always been a symbol of white supremacy.
You just need to rewrite history. You need to get into the textbooks and doctor things up.
Which they have.
Just put Moses in there too, in Texas.
Which, the whole Southern lost cause, I talk about this in the video, the myth of the Southern lost cause, which is the romanticization of the Confederacy and the romanticization of the old antebellum South, that was a post-war phenomenon, and it's one of the most successful historical revision campaigns in American history to convince people, oh, you know what, slavery wasn't that bad, and the South, if they had won the war, they probably would have freed the slaves eventually themselves anyway.
Exactly.
So but you can see how successful it is, because there are quite a few people in the South today who believe that that's how history actually unfolded. They're not aware that that is a major act of historical revisionism.
Yeah, and that's something that I think has led me toward more activism over the last few years, is this realization that we really do have a very divided country, and it's not like everybody shares my relatively progressive values, that we're all on the same page. There's really, some rampant racism at the very, very highest powers of our government, and propaganda works. And so when you have media networks pushing revisionist history, people believe it.
Well, I mean, today is the 1-year anniversary of Ferguson, of the shooting of Michael Brown. And you can see how little has changed in the 1 year since then. I mean, I've lost count of how many similar incidents there have been just in the last year. It's kind of appalling. I was talking to a friend about it recently, and he said, you know, this sort of thing has probably been happening just this often all along. It's just we weren't paying attention to it.
Or it wasn't being reported. The media really has a responsibility to
Exactly. Yeah, and of course now people complain about that. You know, it always makes the news if it's a white officer killing a black guy. Well, it's been happening all along. Would you rather it just happen and nobody talk about it? Apparently that's
and the answer is yes.
Why do we have to talk about that?
All right, another one you talked about in that same video was an NRA loophole for the default proceeds. What is that default proceeds sales, and what's the scope of, why does that matter?
That's a portion of our gun law that is one of the parts of our gun laws that makes the least sense to me. And there's a lot about our gun laws that doesn't make any sense to me. But there's something called a default proceeds sale, which states that if you are seeking to purchase a gun and you have to go through a background check, and the background check takes longer than 3 days to complete, you can have the gun. At the discretion of the seller. The gun seller can decide, well, the background check's taken too long, so I'm going to go ahead and give you the gun. They're legally entitled to take the gun regardless of the fact that they haven't completed a background check. And according to the FBI, this loophole has, in the last 10 years, this loophole has allowed 30,000 people.
Yeah, that was shocking when you said that. I had
who would not have been allowed to have guns otherwise, to purchase guns. And of course, legislation has been introduced to close the loophole because Dylan Roof, the Charleston shooter, got his gun as a result of that kind of a default proceed sale.
So he got it legally?
Technically he did, yeah.
He got it through the loophole.
Because I heard that he got it illegally.
Well, he would have gotten it, he would not have been allowed to get it if the background check had gone through. What happened was there was some kind of a mix-up with the paperwork. The FBI office didn't get the paperwork into the gun seller in time, and there was something in Dylan Roof's record, I forget what it was. He had some kind of an arrest on his record that would have prohibited him from getting the gun.
Why does somebody need a gun that fast? Like
that
all of a
is
sudden,
my question.
I need a gun right now. Like,
you'd
would
think
that be like a red flag?
Right, one of the sensible parts for gun regulation might be there's a waiting period. This is not trying to take guns away from everybody in the country. And I know it's there's two sides of the issue. A lot of us only see mostly we need more safety and some regulation isn't bad. But you would think that the vast majority of people would say, sure, that's sensible to do a decent, thorough check.
And actually, from the polling data that I've seen, the vast majority of people do say that. It's just that the NRA is a radical extremist organization, and when legislation was introduced in Congress recently to close this loophole, of course the NRA came out against it and said, no, we have to protect gun owners from, what if they're denied their Second Amendment rights unfairly by a background check. And my response is, just like you just said a moment ago, why do you need a gun that bad? That fast? Isn't public safety, shouldn't public safety take precedence over the possibility that maybe every once in a while a gun buyer
we have multiple competing rights, is just the reality of the situation. So sometimes different important rights of ours are in conflict, and you have to figure out the way to best mitigate the harm that gets done and figure out a way. And so, that would seem a reasonable solution, is to err on the side of public safety. But so, like you said, the reason that doesn't happen isn't popular support, it's lobbying. So maybe you can talk a little bit about money in our political system. One of the news things that we didn't do, we talked about, was the Koch brothers recently invited 4 of the candidates to their thing. Fox News decided which guys are going to be on their main debate. Koch brothers also had a couple of the justices, Clarence Thomas and Scalia, at their boondoggle several years ago. What do you see happening to democracy, with Citizens United, the things that let money pour in?
Well, it's not good. I mean, it's not very pro-democracy. I'm someone who is a supporter of mandatory public funding of elections. I think that's probably the best way to go. I don't think that's ever going to happen, or at least it's not going to happen for a while, given the current political climate where the big donors have such influence, where if someone were bold enough to introduce legislation saying, hey, let's have mandated public funding of all elections to get this private money out so everybody's on an even playing field, the Koch brothers or whoever can just come in and say, oh no, we're not doing that. And it's not going to happen. And it's a real shame because it distorts our politics. It raises doubt in the legitimacy of our democracy. It makes it really, really hard for candidates from smaller parties to get a fair shake. I'm not someone who generally, shakes my fist at the two-party system, but I would like for there to be a bit more of an even playing field for smaller parties. Now, most of those smaller parties don't field candidates that I would vote for in a million years, but I do think that the political process would be healthier if there were more than two people to vote for in, say, a presidential election.
Yeah, and in terms of the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
So in terms of the money, right now we see Donald Trump is rich, so he might theoretically fund his own third-party run.
Yeah.
And then you had like Sheldon Adelstein last go-around single-handedly supported Newt Gingrich for extra months.
Yeah.
And so again, this influx of money, the pretense that money doesn't matter, when corporations act like that's all that matters, that's all they live around until it's time to say is it interfering with politics, I said, no, it really doesn't matter. People can vote either way they want. The cognitive dissonance to sort of accept that that's the truth, that it doesn't matter despite all the efforts to pump it in. How do you think we can combat that?
I don't know. I think part of it has to be combated on the ground. I think these efforts to limit the voting franchise, to stop certain people from voting, have to be resisted. These voter ID laws, where they're sort of unfairly targeting poor communities, minority communities, to say, oh, we're going to try to get these people to stay home on election day, or to make it as difficult for them to vote as possible so that more of our guys will vote. I think that is a large part of it, because ultimately it's not going to change unless people who want it to change turn out at the polls and vote for candidates who are willing to change it. In theory, we could change this anytime we wanted, but it would just take a massive mobilization of people to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to vote for this guy or this girl who says, I'm against this, I'm going to vote against this, and we have to turn out at the polls and elect these people, and then hold them to account and make sure that they do what they promised that they're going to do. And it sounds easy to say it, but obviously it's not. It's much easier said than done.
Well, it's like penetrating that bubble, getting it onto the media widely that these voter laws are really just trying to disenfranchise millions of voters. You can't even get that through to half the people because they don't watch the networks that will even mention it. And then, even the more liberal networks, they'll talk about that. But I guess you have a video that does 5 stupid things about liberals. I spend most of my time bashing the conservative end. Well, why don't we run through a few of those?
Why don't we alienate some of our fellow liberals?
So one of those you had is the determination of liberals falls short of our ideas, and maybe this is a good example of that.
Yeah. I mentioned this a little bit in a video I did recently about millennials, who I am not nearly as pessimistic about as a lot of people. I'm sort of on the fence. I'm either a young Generation Xer or an old millennial, so I don't want to be too harsh on the millennials. But yeah, unfortunately, millennials don't vote as often as other voting blocs, especially if it's a non-presidential election year, or worse yet, a local election or a state election. Millennials just don't turn out to the polls. So, and it's not just millennials, it's liberals in general. We often have really wonderful ideals. We have great ideas of, oh, this country could be so much better if we did this and we did this and we did this. And then we don't put that into political action, which means it's kind of worthless. It's wonderful to have ideals and to be able to say, oh, here's how we make the country better. But you have to then put that into action. You can't just speak it, and it's not like The Secret. It's not like the law of reciprocity, where you speak it into the ether and then it happens. You have to make it happen, and we're really bad at that.
Yeah, and again, we just don't have the media wings, so we'll have the Richard Dawkins Foundation is actually a small handful of people. The Skeptic Society does a lot of great work, but it's nothing to balance out just these juggernauts that dominate everything. You almost think if the American Humanist Association, so many, most liberals are probably behind most of their ideas, but somehow they don't wield that kind of power. And I don't know how you could sort of, we need to sort of move to where they do. Because again, our population is so much more progressive than our politics, and we really, it's not
economic politics.
Yeah, well, and educational. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that most people, you're not willing to totally sacrifice yourself, but it's no skin off my back to help other people get a good education. Why would I be opposed to that? I think, most Americans would echo a lot of good sentiments that would help the country, and it's how do we get past our current political system. How do we make it better? And it's not as simple as you vote Democrat and it's fixed, right?
Well, of course not. Of course not. One of the really frustrating parts about the Democratic Party is that they have a tendency to sort of backpedal a little sooner than many of us would like. I mean, I'm not registered Democrat. I live in Maryland and I'm registered unaffiliated. Mm-hmm. But I almost always vote Democrat because that's where I lean. Mm-hmm. But I'm just as frustrated with the Democratic Party as a lot of my fellow liberals are, because they often say the right thing, but when push comes to shove, it seems like they get pushed over, exactly. Mm-hmm. And it's really frustrating.
I think it has a lot to do with, radical mindsets tend to be more, even if they're illogical, they tend to be more like, no, we're going to do this, and they push through and they get to the end. And a lot of times when you see like the radical right, right-leaning politics tend to be more like that. They're very confident in what they think. They're not as willing to criticize themselves, and therefore they're able to get through a cohesive message. And I don't think, sometimes I feel like there isn't as much of a cohesive message even in certain aspects. Like everybody understands that we want social change, for instance, but everybody's still arguing about what that social change is. And because, I don't know. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, to me, there's a good example of that in the way many Democrats are still reacting to President Obama. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think by most measures, you would have to say that Obama has at least been a fairly successful president. Mm-hmm. I don't think you can fairly say that he's been a failure, mm-hmm. and yet there are quite a few Democrats who are sort of like, well, or they're quick to sort of acknowledge, well, we still have lots of problems, which we do, but you would think that they would want to be grabbing onto this guy's coattails and saying, hey, wait a minute, even with all the opposition he faced, things are a lot better now than they were 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Right, I don't think we arm ourselves with talking points in the same way that the right does, where we say, there's problems. I'm disappointed he didn't go after Bush. I'm disappointed that he, put people from the banking industry right onto the lead. Yeah. However, he did this, and this. That would be a very different response than, you're right, these things were kind of disappointed too, and then you just go away feeling, disempowered.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to show how fair-minded you are by agreeing with people when they say, what about, Obama's been too nice to the banking industry, and what about Obama using drones to, kill terrorists and collateral damage in the Middle East? That all completely legitimate concerns. I agree with all of those. But then a Democrat or a liberal doesn't come back and say, well, but on the other hand, what about this, and this?
Right. All right, let's keep going with liberal problems. One of the things you mentioned was a tendency to drift toward woo.
Oh, yeah.
So talk about kind of like pseudoscience and how, liberals does not make you immune to that.
No, not at all. It's unfortunately a lot of the anti-vaxxers, even when you get into the really cuckoo areas of like conspiracy theorists, in other areas of their thinking, quite a few of these people are liberal people. They support same-sex marriage. They support expanding health care. They support social justice for poor people. Like they're very leftist in their thinking. Mm-hmm. But when you get them talking about certain, I just don't know if I trust Western medicine. Well, really?
So why do you think that is?
I have no idea. I think part of it, maybe because, and this is just, I'm just throwing this out there, this is a very broad statement, but liberals, I think, value being independent thinkers. I think we value being, there's smugness on both sides. There are smug conservatives, but there are smug liberals too, and there are liberals who, we enjoy the thought that we know more than other people. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, if you can say that, well, I don't go to a Western doctor. I go and get Reiki or whatever. If you believe that, you can say, well, I'm in the minority, but I'm right. I'm doing something that other people are too close-minded to do.
There's also the whole I want to be a special little snowflake mentality, I think, especially in the millennial liberals. I think there's a lot of younger people just like, I want to be a special snowflake and I want to be open-minded. And it's great to be open-minded, but if you don't walk into an open mind with a little bit of skepticism, at least a little bit, you're not going to, just going to be floundering, I think.
It's the old saying that you don't want your mind to be so open that your brain falls out.
Right, Michael Shermer has a great quote about that. So one of your other videos is that moon landing, and I think it had over 200,000 views, which is phenomenal. So why did that grab people so much?
I think that's my most viewed video, which is kind of nice because the moon landing the moon landing hoax is probably my least favorite conspiracy theory, because people who believe that we didn't actually land on the moon, for one thing, there's no reason to believe that. There's no evidence for a moon landing hoax theory at all. And there's mountains of evidence for people actually landed on the moon. But to me, in addition to that, they're trying to tear down what I think is one of the great accomplishments in human history. I mean, I grew up idolizing astronauts. I grew up loving the space program. This pen in my shirt is an astronaut pen that writes in zero gravity, right? That's how much of a space nerd that I am. And so when I see people saying, they didn't go to the moon, that was all, they shot it on a sound stage and they manufactured.
A lot of people believe in that, though?
Well, I don't think very many people believe in it. But again, it's like we were talking earlier about the MRAs. The people that do believe in it are very, very passionate about it. And there are, when I look at the comments on that moon landing hoax video, that video is, I think, 3 or 4 years old. That was one of my earlier 5 Stupid Things videos. There are arguments in the comments section of that video that have been carrying on for years.
But also you
you
obviously tap into something, because if people just thought this silly, who cares, they wouldn't bother, and that has getting toward 250,000 views.
Are they associated with the flat earthers?
There's probably some overlap.
We've never been to space. We don't know if Earth isn't flat. I don't know.
There's probably some overlap. It's when you slice it down, there are different types of moon hoaxers. Like there are people who believe that we never went to the moon at all. There are people who believe that astronauts flew to the moon but didn't land. They just, like Apollo 8, they just flew and came back.
We saw aliens there and hit up the...
There are people who believed and probably still believe that there are alien cities on the far side of the moon. Now that's demonstrably false. In fact, NASA just released a photo last week, a beautiful picture of the moon passing in front of the Earth, where you can see the far side of the moon. The satellite, they have a satellite called the Discover satellite that's placed outside the orbit of the Earth and the moon, so it can see when the moon passes in front of it, you see the Earth and then you see the moon. And they released this gorgeous photograph. It looks like it was photoshopped or something, but it's this gorgeous photograph of the moon passing in front of the Earth. And you see the far side of the moon. Just craters, no cities, no nothing.
Well, and it's typical, for like pseudoscience and for conspiracy theories, that you've now presented the evidence. So in theory, they're saying, look, we've never seen the far side of the moon. We think there's these colonies for these reasons. You've now shown them the evidence. So now their story is going to change. The goalposts are going to shift. It's not like, hey, thank you for answering my concerns. Exactly. Now I believe it.
That's core to the whole conspiracy theory thing, is that we call them conspiracy theories because I guess we have to call them something. But they're not really theories. It's more like conspiracy accusations.
Right. And then they'll cherry pick the data. They'll ignore the fact that you prove something when they move the goalposts.
And often they don't even tell you what they think really happened. They just say, well, I'm just asking questions.
Right, it doesn't have a positive, they don't have a good explanation that accounts for everything else. It's just a denial of whatever the
and that's like,
what is the purpose of it, though? Like, I mean, why would you, people who have such staunch beliefs in things that are just so irrational, typically it's for a purpose, like I feel good because, I feel like I have a sky daddy taking care of me.
Right.
Well, what's the purpose of believing that we didn't get to the moon? I don't understand. That's why it's all like flat earthers, maybe, because they have like a theological reasons to not believe. I don't know.
I think maybe it's
like Martian.
Yeah.
Living on the other side of the moon. I don't know.
It's as simple, I think, sometimes as they just really, really think that they're right. They just think that they've got it right, and everybody else has it wrong.
I think you talked about one of your video with a soundstage, that was all done by a certain director or producer.
Well, yeah, it's funny. The story has been for about 50 years that it was Stanley Kubrick, who was my favorite filmmaker, really, and he directed 2001: A Space Odyssey, which came out before the Apollo landings, and it had some scenes of astronauts on the moon, and it turned out he got it pretty close to right. Not exactly right, but pretty close. And so, people said, oh, well, they probably got Kubrick to direct those, the moon landing films. It's interesting, they almost always talk only about the Apollo 11 landing. They seem to forget that we landed on the moon 6 times over a period of about 3 years. So it's not, we didn't just fake one moon landing. We faked 6 moon landings. And we also faked Apollo 13, which was almost a complete disaster where all the astronauts nearly died.
And you talk about another thing with grand conspiracy theories is they start to expand the amount of colluders. So like with the Russian government, were they in on this with us?
Yeah, which they would have had to be. because the Russians were monitoring our space. I mean, the whole political reason why we went to the moon in the first place was to show up the Russians. Yeah. If there hadn't been, it's really the only positive result of the Cold War is saying, well, we got to get to the moon. We got to beat the Russians. And if we had faked that, if we hadn't actually sent astronauts,
Russia would just be like,
they might have called us on that.
Yeah, I don't think they would have let us get away with that in the late 60s at the height of the Cold War.
So we just have a few minutes left. One other thing I want to touch on that you talked about a little bit is Christ probably wasn't a laissez-faire capitalist. Talk about the prosperity gospel and where the, if you want to throw on the religious right,
Well, the thing about the prosperity gospel that really galls me is that most of the people who contribute to it or who contribute to televangelists who have that pitch are people who don't have money to spare. We know that, for instance, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, where a lot of these prosperity gospel televangelists, or just televangelists in general, have their shows where they reach their widest audience, most of the people who watch that network are retirees on fixed incomes, and they're basically being told by people on TV who they trust, if you give us more money than you can afford to give us, God will give you even more than that back. And that to me is evil. I don't even know another word for that.
That's preying on their ignorance and their desperation.
Yeah, you're preying on their desperation, and you're promising them things that you have no right to promise them, that based on things that nobody had any right to promise you. I mean, it's all just, it's a fraud. Whether they truly believe it or whether they are intentionally scamming people is irrelevant to me. The fact is that there are people who are being fleeced, and it's all on the promise of, well, if you give it to us, then God will give it back to you.
Not on their ethics, just here's a good investment on your return.
And about Jesus, I mean, the portrayal of Jesus is kind of inconsistent in the New Testament, but most of the time when he talks about the poor, he talks about helping the poor and giving to the poor, not taking from the poor on the promise that God will fill them in later. So it's not, to me, it's not even a very good interpretation of Christianity.
All right, you got about a minute left. You've been doing this for about 4 years, you said. Are you just about out of stupid things in the world, or do you have any stuff coming up that you still want to tackle?
Yeah, I have a list of topics that I still have to do. I don't know how many more I have in me. I'm toying with the idea of ending the series at number 300, and I just am about to reach 200, so it would be another 2 years. Nothing is set in stone, but yeah, I have plenty left, unfortunately.
What do you want to bring up after that? Well, I guess we're at the end of the show, but...
Yeah, well, how can people track you down if they want to watch some of your videos, see what stuff you talk about?
You can go to youtube.com/Steve Shives. You'll be able to see more of me than you could ever possibly want.
Excellent. Well, we have already done that. And we'll be happy to post a link on our show. Everybody, thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with Larry and Rick talking to Robert Beatty on separation of church and state. And thank you for joining us. Like us on Facebook. If you have any questions or comments, you feel free to call in during the shows. Also feel free to send stuff on Facebook, and we'll try to address issues that you're concerned with. So thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.